Have you ever looked at your investment account and felt like you're barely making progress towards your financial goals? Maybe you've been investing for years and you're sitting at $20 or $30,000, wondering if this will ever turn into real wealth. You're doing what you're supposed to do, you're being consistent, and yet the numbers barely seem to move. If you quit investing before this point, you quit right before the math starts working for you. Here's the part most people don't realize. Once you reach $100,000 in investments, you're not 10% of the way to a million. You're roughly one-third of the way there. That's not motivation, that's math. And once you understand why, it permanently changes how you think about money, progress, and patience. By the end of this video, I'll show you why most millionaires didn't actually invest most of the money in their accounts. Time did. And why the stage you're in right now, the one that feels slow and unrewarding, is the hardest part of the entire journey. Most people think wealth grows in a straight line. Save $1,000, you're $1,000 closer. Save $50,000, you're $50,000 closer. Simple, intuitive, and completely wrong. Wealth doesn't grow linearly, it grows exponentially. And that misunderstanding is exactly why so many people quit investing before compound interest ever has a chance to matter. Let's make this real instead of abstract. Imagine you invest $100 every single week. That's about $400 per month. It's not nothing, but it's also not a billionaire strategy. For many people, it's the difference between being intentional with spending and letting money leak out unnoticed. Now assume your investments earn an average of 8% per year. That number already accounts for inflation, and it's actually conservative by historical standards. With that setup, it takes about 12 years of consistent investing to reach your first $100,000. And this is where most people panic. 12 years feels like forever when you're watching your balance creep up slowly. It feels like you're sacrificing now for a payoff that may never come. This is the exact moment when people convince themselves that investing doesn't really work, or that they started too late. But here's what's actually happening during those 12 years. Most of your balance is coming from your own effort. Out of that first $100,000, roughly $62,000 comes directly from your weekly contributions. Only about $38,000 comes from growth. That's not a failure of compound interest. That's compound interest warming up. In this phase, you are the engine. Your discipline matters more than returns. Your consistency matters more than strategy. This is the phase where you're building the foundation, not the skyscraper. And this is where people misjudge the process. They assume slow progress now means slow progress forever. They don't realize that what feels unrewarding is actually the most valuable work they'll ever do. Because once you clear that first 100,000, the math starts shifting. This is where most people stop watching. But this next part is why the math finally flips. The next milestone is $200,000. And here's the part that surprises almost everyone. It only takes about 6 more years to get there. Half the time it took to reach the first 100,000. By that point, you've contributed around $94,000 total. The rest, more than half, came from growth. Your money is now earning returns on returns. Growth is no longer a bonus. It's becoming a driver. And this is where the mental model breaks for most people. At $200,000, you're not 20% of the way to a million. You're halfway there. Not emotionally, not metaphorically. Mathematically. This is the moment people don't recognize as a turning point, even though it's the hardest part already behind them. Compound interest isn't additive. It doesn't stack dollar by dollar. It compounds on itself. Each year of growth increases the base that future growth builds on. This is why progress feels invisible early on and inevitable later. Think of it like pushing a boulder uphill. The first stretch is brutal. Every step takes effort, and there's no momentum helping you. But once you crest the hill, gravity takes over. The boulder doesn't need pushing anymore. It accelerates on its own. From this point forward, time becomes your greatest advantage. If you keep investing that same $100 per week, nothing more, nothing fancy, you reach $1 million around year 36. Here's the part that changes how people see wealth forever. Over that entire period, You only contributed about $187,000 of your own money. More than 80% of the final balance came from growth. Read that again. Most of the money in the account was never earned through work. It was earned through patience. At that stage, your investments are generating roughly $80,000 per year on their own. Compare that to how long it took to build the first 100,000. That's the difference between effort and leverage. And this is why the early years feel so discouraging. You're putting in the work without seeing proportional results. But the math was never designed to reward you early. It rewards you later. Now, let's address the objections that usually come up at this point. First, inflation. The 8% return used here is already adjusted for inflation. Historically, markets have returned closer to 10% before inflation. These projections aren't optimistic. They're cautious. Second, market crashes. Yes, markets crash. Balances drop. Headlines get scary. But for long-term investors, volatility is not the enemy. Inconsistency is. When markets fall, your weekly contributions buy more shares. When markets recover, and historically they always have, those extra shares compound faster. Downturns feel bad emotionally, but mathematically they're often beneficial for people still accumulating. Third, I can't afford $100 a week. This is where honesty matters. Most people underestimate how much money flows through their hands without intention. This isn't about judgment or deprivation. It's about awareness. Small, consistent adjustments, avoiding lifestyle inflation, being intentional with discretionary spending, often free more money than people expect. This isn't about cutting joy. It's about redirecting money towards something that compounds instead of disappears. And here's something people don't expect. As your investment account grows, motivation increases. Watching your balance rise month after month changes your relationship with money. Investing stops feeling like sacrifice and starts feeling like leverage. Instead of asking, "What am I giving up?" you start asking, "How do I feed this?" That psychological shift is powerful. It's why people who reach 100,000 often accelerate naturally without forcing it. And that's why the first 100,000 matters so much. It's not just a financial milestone, it's proof. Proof that you can delay gratification. Proof that you can stick to a plan through boredom and volatility. Proof that you can think in decades instead of pay periods. This is why Charlie Munger said the first 100,000 is the hardest. Not because the math is complex, but because the discipline is rare. And here's something else worth understanding. All of this math assumes you never increase your contributions, never receive employer matching, and never invest lump sums. Real life almost always improves the outcome. Raises, bonuses, tax refunds, employer matches, they all accelerate the timeline. A single employer match can dramatically reduce how long it takes to reach those milestones. You also don't need complicated strategies. Over long periods, simply matching the market through broad index funds has created more millionaires than any complex approach. You're not trying to outsmart professionals or predict the future. You're letting time and consistency do what they've always done. The most successful investors are usually the most boring ones. So here's the takeaway. $100,000 isn't 10% of the journey. It's the foundation that makes everything else possible. It's the point where effort starts turning into momentum. Time and compound interest will do the heavy lifting, but only if you stay consistent long enough for them to matter. Start now, because decades from today, you'll either be glad you let time work for you, or you'll be wondering why you didn't. If you're not at your first 100,000 yet, we've got videos on this channel that walk through how to get there step by step. I'll see you there.